Hello friends, so today's video is going to be a non-spoiler book review for Engines of Empire. Recently in doing a wrap-up video, I mentioned this one, but in wrap-ups, you kind of give an overview of your thoughts on various books and what they're about, and I felt that we needed an entire video dedicated to this book because I don't think that brief amount of time really gives you much of an indication of what you're going to be getting when you pick this up, nor do I think that that's all it needs. It needs more time to be discussed because it is such an epic first installment in a series and there's so much to it, and I also thought it was amazing. Apologies, most of this video is just going to be me praising this book, but I really think it deserves hype. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. I am going to be going through the various different elements of this book in kind of a very straightforward, here's the setting, here's the magic, those sorts of things. So I will have timestamps in a pinned comment if you want to jump ahead to any specific aspects. But either way, I'm going to start with what I think is sort of the thing that caught my eye when I saw this book initially, and that would be the setting. I keep describing it as Final Fantasy XII meets a Game of Thrones, mainly because of the advancements in technology that this fantasy setting has. So you have something called Pyre Stones, and this is where the magic and science of the book come into play. So this is kind of a combination of discussing the setting and the magic. So the Pyre Stones are something that some individuals have magical abilities that have to do with Pyre Stones, while other individuals are discovering ways to use science to utilize these particular things, and that way you don't rely on magic users. You can advance society through science. Very quickly at the beginning of the story, you see an example of this when it comes to an airship. So that's kind of for those of you that are Final Fantasy fans where this ties in a little bit. So these airships are powered through Pyre Stones, and we're mainly following initially this particular area where they are having all of these things take place, where they are making these discoveries. You do eventually sort of branch out and discover more about magic and the other ways that other areas utilize magic versus science, and so that was really fascinating to explore. But with this particular area, as a result of having so much emphasis on this sort of magic and technology hybrid, you end up having the individuals in charge of Pyre Stones being the ones to run society, being the ones that have the most power. You have guilds that are running things, or guild houses, guild families. And you do have an emperor, but they're kind of more of a figurehead. They represent the guilds, but individual guilds hold a certain amount of power. A little bit like if you've read Mistborn, the way that different noble houses are in charge of different things. And so some noble houses are a little bit more important. You see the way that they kind of scheme against each other. I loved all of that. I loved getting to see how this society functioned. That alone was really engrossing to me. But the main characters that you have within this are primarily a specific family from one specific guild. You do end up having a total of 5 main perspectives, but I would argue that there's 4 main perspectives and then one side one, as well as an epilogue and a prologue that follow different people. The prologue is very much a Game of Thrones type of opening, and you'll know what I mean when you start it. As you read it, you're like, what's going on here? And then as you keep reading the book, you're like, so what's up with that prologue? And I always enjoy prologues like that because it makes it feel like right away you're going to be a part of something huge. But zeroing back in on our characters, our main focus is the Hawkspur family. So they run one particular guild, and you very quickly start to learn that there's so much even within this one family. I wouldn't describe it as family drama necessarily, but you could if you wanted to, because there's so much to, well, this character married into this family and they used to come from here, but now that they're a part of this family, they have this obligation, but this member of the family died, so then now, and you have all these little intricacies within this one family. The Hawkspur family is made up of a mother and her 3 children who are adults. We have Tyrita, Fulren, and Connell. Rosamund, their mother, is a fantastic character, and she's definitely the character that you're going to be following primarily for all of those scheming type of plot lines. So I really enjoyed following her, but I also just enjoyed her as a character as well. And then the 3 other characters, her children, the siblings, are all in different places throughout most of the book. And I do think that typically that's not something I love. I prefer when the characters are together because I think it creates for great character moments. However, we had so many fantastic character moments even without our characters being with each other. These situations they were placed in, you often felt lost alongside them. You also felt the sense of discovery alongside them, and then you got to know them through that. And none of the characters are particularly amazing, but what I mean by that is I don't love Tyrita, Connell, or Fulren. All of them have moments where I'm like, awesome. And then they'd also have moments where I'm like, ugh, you suck. Their personalities and how they are sort of unfolded very organically throughout the book, which I really appreciated. As I said, Rosamund is the character that is 100% in everything going on with the guilds and the nation of Torwin, which is where we start the story often. And then the other characters, Connell has a military presence. Fulren, I can't really say too much about Fulren. He's sort of the engineer of the family and the one that is very much a part of the advancements. And then we have Tyrita, who is meant to take over a very important role within the Hawksburg Guild, but she's that character that she doesn't want any of it. She doesn't want this responsibility. She's finding herself getting into trouble all the time, and she's never meeting her mother's expectations. She's that character. I want to discuss the fifth point of view, but I also think it's better for you to discover that as you read it. Definitely, the author does a great job of shifting your expectations and having reveals where you weren't even expecting there to be a reveal. And this kind of gets me into the pacing. So with the character Tyrita that I was just mentioning, I was talking to my husband about how one character had a very intense thing occur in their plot line. And then I told him, I need Tyrita to have something happen pretty soon. Like, I need something to happen to her. And then as soon as I had that thought, we got it. It was perfect. We had just enough time to get to know characters. We had just enough time to be like, what are we doing here? And then something intense would happen and be like, oh my gosh, all right, I guess that's what we're doing. And the book just surprised me so many times with its twists and turns. I mean, there are plot lines where I'm like, I know what's going on here. And then it would take a complete different direction. And then I was really surprised and very on board with the direction that it was taking. And again, I don't like saying family drama necessarily, but the ways in which characters have to deal with their own family members or the actions of their family members, the consequences of what their family members are doing, it just creates so much tension in the story. I think a lot of it too, a lot of the payoffs that we get are a result of fantastic foreshadowing that was disguised as world building or disguised as just regular conversations between characters. None of the foreshadowing was ever heavy-handed, but then once the payoff would occur for the foreshadowing, then I was kind of awestruck at it. Almost feels like in hindsight it was really obvious, but it wasn't really obvious when it was happening. So I don't want to give really specific examples because I don't want to ruin those moments for anybody, but there was one time when characters are just talking and it was such an organic conversation, and then what they were talking about in that moment, I was like, gosh darn it, that was so well done. And it was not even something I thought would happen. You know, when this is where the Game of Thrones stuff happens. You know, when you're like, you know, I like that person. They've won me over. And then their head gets chopped off and you're like, dang it. It was like that. There were so many times where I was like, all right, cool. This is like where we're going with this plot. And then somebody would die or somebody would make a certain choice or something really weird would happen, and I was always 100% into it. I loved every single time that those oh no moments happened. They were just so satisfying. One aspect of the pacing that might slightly frustrate some people is, one, it's a little bit slower. This was not a book that I devoured in one sitting. It did take me a little bit to get through it. And I was completely fine with that because I needed time to process what was happening, to get to know the characters, to think through and appreciate everything that had just occurred, and then also kind of be formulating what I thought was going to happen moving forward. And what I'm getting at, though, is that it is kind of a slower build-up. That might frustrate some people. And then alongside that, some of the foreshadowing is clearly for the future installments. Some of what happens, it is enticing when you're reading it, but you also kind of know this isn't coming to fruition in this particular one, or this isn't going to play a role just yet. And I know that can bother some people because it can result in you feeling like, ugh, well, that was pointless. I don't care about that. that will matter so far in advance that I'm going to forget everything. I understand that can be frustrating for some people. For me personally, the moments that we got like that were not ever drawn out so much that I felt like they were wasting my time within this book. And also they were very memorable. There are certain things where I thought, I don't know how we're going to get there, but now I'm really worried. And I really liked having that feeling. And it made for whenever there was something that felt satisfying within this book, there's also this thing in the back of your mind like, I don't think that's sticking though. I don't know if that's really, and I know I'm being vague here, but I know that that can be bothersome to some people. It wasn't bothersome to me. Hopefully it won't be for you either, but just a heads up that some of that groundwork is a result of this being a first book in a series. I also think that I didn't 100% really love Tyrita, Connell, or Fulrin. I loved Rosamund, and I loved the other perspective a lot. There were some moments I'm like, that's right, with certain characters, which I really liked. But the other characters, I definitely felt like they were growing throughout the story, or in some ways regressing, perhaps. But they always felt like real people that were just reacting to what was thrown at them. And I think that for some people, they want their heroes to be heroes, or they want their main characters to be a little bit on the antagonistic side. They want them to be somewhat villainous. I don't know that any of these characters are going to fulfill that this hero is someone I can root for kind of a character. They're all just people. And I'm going to tie this into the themes portion now. They're all people that are honestly a part of something that's not particularly great. In order to advance society, in order to have the resources to do this, Torwin, this particular country that we are familiarizing ourselves with through the Hawkspur family, they do not necessarily have everything they need within their own land. Our main characters are from the Hawkspur Guild, and none of them are terrible people, so it's one of those situations where you're following what are decent human beings, but by seeing the story through their eyes, there are hints along the way of what's to come, and you almost don't quite recognize it because the characters don't recognize it. It makes for some fantastic oh my gosh moments that I was mentioning before, and it's one of those, a character might not have seemed all that antagonistic, or maybe you don't quite understand the initial why they're doing what they're doing, but then when you think back on it, you're like, no, that makes perfect sense. And also, you 100% were showing us this the entire time through these various different themes. Also, of course, the Hawkspurs are from Torwin and the Anvil, which are these areas that their family is familiar with. So when you get exposed to other cultures and peoples and places, you start to realize that their way of doing something is not the only way to do something. And even though you'll get something in another place, you'll start to see how that might actually be true of where they live as well. They just don't always see it. The last thing I want to mention would just be descriptions. I don't always give an entire dedicated amount of time to mentioning descriptions, but I just wanted to highlight how much I enjoy the descriptions in this particular story. They were somewhat minimal, so that worked for me. It's probably not going to work for everybody, but in the short amount of time that he would use to describe something, I felt that the author did a fantastic job in describing it, whether it was a person, what they look like, their personality, what an area looked like, what a certain culture was like, what a certain form of magic or technology, how it worked. I just felt like the descriptions were just enough for me. And in not having so many, we could focus on all the other things that I talked about. However, some people I know really need these in-depth descriptions to really feel like they can see the world, to really feel like they understand the world, and also to feel grounded in it. Some people just feel like they're in this white room and there's nothing to it, and that can be bothersome to them. I didn't feel that way, but that's because I don't need that many descriptions, so even though I wanted to praise the amount, I also know that this can be perhaps a con for some other people. All in all, I absolutely love this book. I thought it was a fantastic blend of so many different things I like, fantastic pacing, great oh my gosh moments, interesting in-depth characters, a fascinating world, a slightly more unique setting with just enough familiar tropes to make me feel like I'm all caught up. I just thought it was fantastic, and I highly, highly, highly recommend it to so many people. I hope if you check it out that you enjoy it too. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.